Welcome to Certain Point of Views Trade School, where each episode a different host talks about a comic book trade paperback that they loved and why they love it.
Sometimes it's easier to be the person people think you are, you know? That is a line from 8 Ball delivered to MoonKnight in a relatively recent issue of Volume 9. 8 Ball, in case you're not familiar, is a ridiculous character. In a story where people, mostly everybody really, wears their underpants on the outside, which is to say there's a certain expectation of inherent absurdity in a cape comic book, 8 Ball is even more ridiculous. He wears an 8 ball on his head, he carries a pool cue as a weapon, and there was a period where he drove a pool rack-shaped ship throughout the city. He's an old-time Marvel character who never really got an update, like Stiltman, or The Ringer, or the Trapster, who technically got an update because he used to be Paste Pot Pete, but I don't think the Trapster angle's really making anything better. Or perhaps more popularly, the Shocker, Mr. Triple Ply himself. So imagine my surprise when this ridiculous character 8 Ball says such a palpable line about society's interpretation of you that caused both me and MoonKnight on the page to pause and stammer. That happens dozens of times throughout modern MoonKnight. If you're not reading Volume 9 MoonKnight, however you break down your comic books, you are missing out on one of Marvel's greatest stories. Not just for things like that, but because of its positive representation. I think comic books, stories, and especially cape comic books are at their best when they paint a better world than the one we have, and part of that better is inclusion. Modern MoonKnight has positive representation of DID and therapy and relationships. I don't know about a lot of comic books that do all three of those things and still leave you with all the stuff you expect to find in a cape comic book. There's going to be explosions. Somebody's going to get stabbed. Somebody's going to get killed. Somebody's going to get thrown off of a building. There's going to be lots of moral posturing, right? All the stuff you expect to find in a comic book where somebody has a cape and a lot to say. Mark goes to therapy and is totally normal. It's not weird. No, they don't even talk about it. The only time they talk about it is when he doesn't go because he experiences an emotional spiral and his friends check him by pointing out that he's not going to therapy. That's super wholesome. Sure, you see Mark's therapy sessions and his relationship with his therapist at a certain point, I think, shifts out of the professional and then eventually back into it. It's a little messy because MoonKnight's a little messy, but the representation of the therapy itself is not the point of the story. They're not fronting representation. And it's really wholesome. Mark's life is made better for the therapy. And I don't think anybody reading the story, nor anybody in the story, argues that that's true. His DID, while occasionally a talking point, is mostly accepted as just the way things are. Water is wet, the sun is hot, and Mark is part of a DID system. That's it. We don't use words like cure or fix or reunification because it's not like that. His representation, as far as relationships go, with Tigra is really wholesome. Mark, in case you're not familiar with a MoonKnight comic, is a big personality. Big. And a damaged guy. Mark shares his system with several other people. Mark does not share his relationship with several other people. But Tigra has to be aware that the other parts of Mark are in there. Mark has baggage. Tigra also has baggage. They're two very large personalities. And it's lovely to see Tigra, who has been historically treated as not really a person, but more like an object covered in fur by Marvel, as a person with baggage who is both a whole person, like A1. Mark is also A1, and their relationship is a new one, while they still remain one and one. Their incredible fires don't consume the other person, nor do they get lost in the other person. Hopefully, in your life, you are or you know of somebody in a relationship much like this one. Big, fiery, strong personalities who both make space for the other person's fire and don't let their own be stamped out. I think what I'm trying to say here is Mark and Tigra have meaningful boundaries, and that's really refreshing. Their traumas prior to this moment in the relationship didn't just disappear because Marvel wanted to tell this story. They're a part of it. They're an integral part of it. So, in recap, Modern Moon Knight is worth your time because it has DID representation that's positive. It has, like it's not even there, degrees of normalcy regarding therapy, and a very meaningful, positive portrayal of healthy relationships with boundaries regarding people who wear their underpants on the outside. Think about that, how ridiculous that is for a moment. And if all that isn't enough for you, if you're like, yeah, but it's a comic book, what about the art? What about the visual medium? Oh my God. That is some of the best art on Hulk's Green Earth. You got to get in on that. Sidebar for Modern Hulk. It's also really great. If you're not reading Modern Moon Knight, if you're not looking at it, you're missing out. Some of that art, most of that art, is incredible. Some of the best art in the game today. Now, I might be a little biased as a guy who sees the world morally in black and white. Sure, there's nuance before most decisions, all decisions really, but I think ultimately the decision itself is binary. Do this, don't do that. Go to work, don't go to work. Take the pain meds, don't take the pain meds. Eat, don't eat, whatever. So I'm a little biased, sure, that's true. But I think Modern Moon Knight does a great job of interpreting the moral binary in a way that is more palatable for other people who don't already see the world that way. Which is to say, Moon Knight is the modern interpretation of a zealot that is reasonably palatable. Which I suppose brings us to Khonshu, doesn't it? Can't talk about Moon Knight without talking about the cranky old bird. In case you haven't read a Moon Knight comic book for a long time, it might come as a shock to you that Mark and his relationship with his god is not positive. They are not a team. Mark is not interested in anything Khonshu has to offer or say most of the time, and Khonshu is presented as a manipulative, cranky divine being who is going to get his way whether you like it or not, and is more than indirectly threatening. I think it's separately from I think Moon Knight is an important comic book. Personally, I think it's a fascinating dive into how do you keep the religion but lose the God? Keep the mission, lose the faith. I know a couple people who are part of various religions who have done that very thing. So I might have a mixed bag interest there, an extra interest, in that I see actual people I know in Mark. In case you also have that, or you're curious to see what that looks like, I implore you to pick up Modern Moon Knight, start with Age of Khonshu, and work your way forward. Anyway, that's really all I had to say about Moon Knight and why you should be reading it. The DID rep is positive and really wholesome. The therapy rep is wholesome. The relationship is one of the best relationships I've seen in comic books today. Also, I'm more than a little biased because I see more than a little bit of myself in Mark and more than a little bit of my wife in Tigra. So there's that. And the art is incredible. If you need an onboarding point because you don't want to start in the 80s, and I can't say I blame you, start with Age of Khonshu and work your way forwards. If you can't find the Age of Khonshu one-shot, you might start with the Moon Knight #1 that came out right after that. I bet your local store can help you find it. Anyway, thanks for listening and happy reading.
The world is getting stranger every day, and somehow Transmetropolitan saw nearly all of it coming. From weaponized misinformation to political theater to tech that reshapes our lives faster than we can process, the series' future feels uncomfortably familiar. The Word from Tomorrow is a new read-along podcast digging into that uncanny prescience. Hosted by Case Aiken and Keith Lettinen, each episode welcomes a guest to explore how Warren Ellis and Derek Robertson's dystopian satire mirrors the world we're living in now. Across 10 episodes, we walk through the entire series. Its politics, its media chaos, its dark humor, and the way it continues to hit with startling clarity. Listen at certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
CPOV.
certainpov.com.